Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode with myself and Stephen. This time, we've had a bit of an argument off camera, but apparently I'm leading on this one because I brought it up, which is not how I like to roll things off, is it, Stephen? As you know, I'd
No,
like you to
no.
fire us off. Anyway, we've got a really interesting one today, and we've called this one Tearing Up the Rule Book. And one of the things that we want to talk about, and I want to get Stephen's take on, because I have a view, he'll have a view, is about how we work in a business. So this whole 9 till 5, fulls 5 day weeks versus 4 day weeks, job descriptions, hierarchies, all these things. I'm a big believer that isn't a very good way of approaching business. That do we really need all parts of the business to be working 9 till 5? Probably not. Do we need everybody to be in the office for the full 5 days or even working for the full 5 days? But do they have to then go down to part time hours? But if perhaps they can do the work that's expected of them, that's agreed, that's needed, could you still pay them for a full week, but only expect them or only ask them to come in for for 3 or 4 days a week? Job descriptions. Something I passionately against is job descriptions, because you're asking, maybe if there's 10 people in a role to do the same job. I know from the work that I do, and I think Stephen would say the same, that all 10 people are going to be very, very different. So therefore, to have, again, expectations that people will perform in the same way based on the same generic job description, when you've got 10 different individuals working on it, it's just recipe for disaster and recipe for disappointment, really. So I thought it'd just be useful for us to back and forth over 15, 20 minutes just talking about that, to see if we can't spark some ideas or thoughts from people listening. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, in that I just kind of want to encourage businesses to break that whole 9 till 5 mentality, that you must work all the hours that we pay you to do and so forth, and that it's much more about value. So what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the word that comes to mind straight away for me is I think a lot of this starts with the recruitment process. And I think what tends to happen is we don't recruit enough based on personality and attitude. So what happens is we create a working environment that's not very trusting. So what then happens is you say, oh yeah, you've got to work 9 till 5, you've got to work this many hours, and you've got to work this many days, because you don't trust. And because you don't trust, you're creating a carcass, a framework, a process, a system that makes you feel comfortable that people are doing what you think they should be doing. And the reality is, I think what it's about for me is building an environment that's based on trust. And when you build an environment based on trust, it's more about the delivery. It's more about what you do in the time that you're there. It's more about that value driven proposition in terms of what you bring to the table, and it's less than about, well, you start at this time in the morning and you finish at this time, you work this day of the week, and you don't need to work this day of the week. I will taper that with saying I do believe with some jobs that you do need that human contact, but it might not be that you need that human contact every day, or it might not even mean that you need that human contact every week, but you plan into that structure some form of human contact. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So I generally will meet someone in person, that I'm going to mentor and coach. But once I've built up that initial trust and understanding, and I've seen the white of their eyes, they've been able to talk to me, I understand them a bit more, they understand me a bit more, we can then go on to sort of conversing digitally, and it works well. I'm not saying that you can't start a relationship digitally, because you can. But what I'm saying is it makes it that much easier. And I think what's happened in the workplace is we need a mixture of, sometimes we need you in person, sometimes we need you digitally, sometimes we might need written correspondence. But what I'm getting at is, if you have the people with the right attitude and they're demonstrating the right behaviour, then you don't have the lack of trust. So I think what happens is businesses get built and the trust is not there. So the 9 to 5 it's basically, if you think about what does 9 to 5 actually mean? It means that I'm confident that between these 2 hours you're working. We know in real roles where you need people to be, really, really artistic. We need people to really use their knowledge around something. It might not work 9 to 5.
Yeah.
Their ideas and that sort of that knowledge might come when in the shower. It doesn't necessarily come when they're working the hours 9 to 5. So for me, it's the trust
Yeah.
and the behaviour and it's about culture of the organization. So all of these things start to come in. And the rule book, really, there should be no rule book.
Yeah.
Because what should actually happen is we should be saying, right, this is what the client needs from us, or this is the product that we're trying to sell. And actually, if we can do that, in 2 hours, great stuff. If it takes us 5 hours, great stuff. And this is why I guess the value pricing comes into it, because it's not based on a time, it's based on a delivery. So that's kind of where it lands with me.
Yeah, I think that's something that we're finding in the professional services. We were talking just off air recording about that, weren't we? That a lot of firms are moving away from hourly rates and things like that, which is nice. It's a good shift away to that whole value, because people are coming to you for an outcome of some description in that particular scenario. And certainly, yeah, I really like the point about trust, because I think sometimes these rules are either adopted because they have always been there if it's a long running company, or they very much reflect on the leadership and the ownership of what they think is the best way. And again, the only thing that can be certain is that the vast majority of people around you don't think like you do. They might appear like they are, and it depends again on the kind of culture you've got as to how aligned they may want to make themselves feel. But I tell you, if you're working a rigid structure and so forth, the likelihood that people are fully engaged all the way down is incredibly low. There's a thing that I roll out from time to time that I won't bore people on this podcast, though, about engagement levels at work, and it's very bad at the moment, particularly in European business and certainly in the UK. And this is that whole point. Okay, great. You've got people coming in 9 till 5, Monday to Friday if they're full time. Let me tell you that a huge majority of them are giving like 50, 60% capacity of what they can do. So was it worth having them in for that length of time, for those days of the week? Probably not. The same with working from home. There's a feeling that some people work well at home, some people don't work well at home, but we're not finding enough businesses that I'm coming across that are checking. They're not checking in. And I was having a conversation with one recently about the fact that we probably do start needing to monitor the performance levels and the productivity levels, because actually if people are producing more from home, well, why the hell aren't we letting them go home? Flip it round. If people are producing more in the office, we need to be bringing them into the office, and we need to be having that open dialogue with them. But in terms of just saying you must do, how do we know? This is the question, isn't it? How do we know if we're asking people to work 9 till 5, how do we know we're getting the best out of them? And the only answers that I would normally hear is because they know what's expected of them, and because that's the hours that we operate, and that's what our customers expect. Well, I would say bollocks to all three. You don't really know what your customers will put up with and what they will be happy with. So that 9, because I always hear that a lot with phone calls needing to be answered and things like that, depending on, there are certain, obviously, examples where that might be necessary. But there isn't really a need for it to be a phone call, because sometimes it could be they could email in or they could message in and so forth. So I'll give you a perfect example. I live in Taverham. I've got a vet that I use, and it's much easier to book appointments that are non-urgent via email with the vet, and they actively encourage it because it doesn't distract them from multiple calls coming in. Now, you would think that a vet needs to be on the phone 24/7, and they do have a very specific bit for emergencies, but actually they are encouraging you to book appointments online or via email. So it's possible, it's doable, and the customers in the main are happy. And the ones that aren't, there is still this facility. But we're coming across businesses who are still no, we must have we have to have calls open all the time. We must be available all the time to our customers. That's what they want. Well, you've never asked. You've not given them an alternative option. There's plenty of people. I hate making phone calls, for a perfect example. I hate being put on hold. And this is the thing: if you're 9 till 5. Is making sure that people answer the phone, but then you've got one of those hateful phone operating systems which are putting people on hold, and you think you're worried about whether your customer wants that and so forth. I question it, and I'd ask you to review it. And it's the same with workers. If you think they want to work from home, just check. They might not. And equally, if you think that they're happy working in the office, perhaps they wouldn't mind. Perhaps they would be more effective if they had this working from home option. And ultimately, if they can do everything you need that role to do in a shorter amount of time under the conditions that they set for themselves, why wouldn't you explore that? I just don't understand it. I think I've begun to realise I may have actually set myself off here again, because it's irritating me more than I realise, because we're 21st century. We don't need 9 to 5s in the vast majority of cases. And in the cases where there is a need for something over that period, again, get everybody together, work out a solution that everybody's happy with. Stop telling people how they must do things. Yes, you're paying them, but that is at the moment just a compensatory thing that puts up for them giving up those hours per week. They're not fully engaged. In the vast majority of cases, I'd say 8 out of 10 people are actively disengaged in their work, or disengaged in some degree, which means you're paying an awful lot more to get the same level of work done under these rules that you have in place. And I just question it. It doesn't make sense to me, because like that final point on that thing, if someone's giving you 50-60% of what they're capable of, you're having to employ twice as many people to get what you need. I mean, just let that sink in for a minute. And that's the conversation I'm having a lot with at the moment. And I'm meeting huge amounts of resistance in these conversations. I'm not making progress.
Yeah.
But again, you're paying 10 people £30,000 to do a job. So we're saying that's costing you £300,000 to do it. Well, I'm telling you that if they're not engaged, then, or if they were engaged, that would cost you half as much. Or if you kept those people in employment, which would be my preference, you would get twice as much value out of them.
Sure. And I guess it goes back down to that, it crosses over a lot of things, from productivity. The first thing that comes to mind, if people are engaged, then they're just more productive in what they do. I think it also comes down to the nature of the job and the best way to deliver that through communication. What is the best communication channel? And sometimes it is the phone, sometimes it email, or a mixture of everything. But I do think it all rests on this trust.
Yeah.
I think so much of process and systems that are put in place, they're put in place because we don't trust.
Yeah.
So they're put in place to make, so you believe you're getting productivity because they're working from one time to another time. But like you said, they might not be productive in that time frame, but it makes you feel more comfortable.
Yeah.
And that honesty piece as well, isn't it? I think there's so much more work that needs to be done, in my opinion, in the recruitment process and the onboarding process, to make sure that we get the right people, and then once we've got the right people, that we induct them in the right way, so that they want to stay in that organisation. And honestly, I do think, Oliver, it's a really, really important part. And I don't think flexibility is going to go away. But I do believe that we need to improve our productivity, and the way to do that is to have the trust element, but also to understand the benefits, because I do think we have lost, and I will defend this. I think we have lost some of our productivity based on hybrid working, I know that some businesses out there are struggling because they don't get people together enough. So I do think it is a real balance, and depending on certain roles, you do need to balance it. So you do get people together. On the same side, you don't need to have people working from one time to another time, and that's set in stone. I think you need to give it all the right flexibility. I think you need to build the right culture in the first place. I think you need to be looking at people's behaviours and cultures to make sure that they get right. And dare I say it, because this is quite controversial, I think business owners, team leaders and managers need to be going out to people's homes and making sure that they are okay. One, that they've got the right equipment, okay. One, that the environment that they're working in is right. One, that you've done enough as an employer to make sure that all their needs are met so they can do the job effectively. I think that phrase "out of sight, out of mind," I think comes to mind a lot. In my mind, and I think there still needs to be much more work done investing in people to make sure that the investment is right, in order that they can deliver, and they're a good investment, because we're not just investing in the people, we're not just leaving them to get on with it, and what I'm talking about here, and I'm sure there's people listening to this podcast now going, yeah, you're right, there'll be people balancing their laptops on their lap, right? There'll be people working on the side of their beds.
Yeah.
There'll be people working on their breakfast table. There'll be people working, and don't get me wrong, there'll be people sat on their sofas also watching telly and working at the same time. And I just think there's a balancing act out there, and there's more risk assessment that needs to be done, and I think there's much more understanding to support people so that we get the right engagement and the right productivity.
Yeah. No, I think that's really, really interesting, especially from the businesses that are closing down offices. and thinking that this is what we're moving towards, sort of hybrid, and then maybe have a smaller location. I mean, the number of businesses that I keep hearing are moving out of London, for example, and so forth. I'm not going to worry about the economic factor, but they're just making these decisions, and decisions are based on money. They're based on expensive properties. They're not based on the health and well-being of their people. Exactly right. The point that I raised, because I think I can hear a lot of business owners, and certainly some of the clients I've worked with when I first started speaking to them, as opposed to how they are now. But when they would have first met me, would have say, "Oh, right, yeah, well, so you're putting it all on us." No, actually, I'm not, because if you don't do this, you'll lose these people, and it won't be the people that you want. The good people will go. The bad ones, as you would see it, will stay, and the good people will go, because there is a competitive market out there now. It is
100%.
in many sectors an employees market. If you're not considering this stuff, I honestly worry for you. And I always think of the analogy. I forget the names involved, but when the various people at Microsoft heard about Apple and heard about this little idea of these computers and so forth, and said they weren't worried about it, were they? And look at where we are now. So if you just sit there and you're like, it's never going to happen, people are always going to need these jobs and so forth, I promise you in 5 years you probably won't even have a business with that attitude. Certainly in 10, because this is moving at an incredible pace. Lockdown 1 massively transformed how we work forever. It massively transformed how people see work, and we're going to cover this in another podcast a little bit about people's purpose, why they do what they do. It gave a huge number of people time to reevaluate how they work, why they work, what they do. So if you are just expecting people to come in and work under your conditions, those days are gone. They may be slowly disappearing in certain places, but they are gone. And people will come in, especially the younger people coming through, will come in with demands, not just requests. They will demand a way of working. They will demand a number of hours. They will demand a type of work. You might not like it, but it's coming. So I feel that this is a sort of first step in the direction of sort of helping people in businesses just recognize what is coming, and you can be ready for it or you can get left behind. That's how I see it. So that's my fairly strong final point on it. Any final things you would like to add?
Yeah, I would just say, try and stay agile, try and stay flexible, and try and have people at the center of what you do. Because I think if you have people at the center of what you do, I think you invariably will make the right decisions.
Yes. Yeah. I think we definitely agree 100% on that, because I think a lot of people don't think about the people, they just think about the numbers, which is not ideal. Understandable, but not ideal. So, and I should just stress, both of us have a lot of experience of working and having responsibility for people. My family and our business, we had many hundreds of people that we employed. You've worked in retail and all different shapes and sizes. So we're not sitting here from that position of, it's not our problem. We're just saying these things. That's your problem. We've been here, we've done it. We know how hard it is, and we know how scary that is, and we know that trusting people is bloody hard. We're not sitting here saying just trust people. They have to earn it, but you have to give them the opportunity. So I think I could hear quite a few people there sitting like, that's all right for you, isn't it? You two blooming coaches just sitting there telling us how we should do it. But I can hear it now. No, we've been there. We know it. We understand it. We're sympathetic, but we're just saying it's coming, whether you're ready or not. So excellent. Well, that was a nice meaty one, and I thoroughly enjoyed it myself. So I think we'll probably end it there. Lovely. See you at the next one.
Bye for now.